He confessed 30 years later. Here's what he said. Before we go any further, if true crime keeps you up at night the way it does us, hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because what happened in this case will follow you long after the video ends. Comment, I'm still thinking about it if a case has ever stayed with you for years. Now let's begin. The rain hadn't stopped in 3 days when they found the letter. It was tucked inside a manila envelope taped beneath the underside of a park bench in Millhaven, a quiet town 40 minutes outside Cleveland, the kind of place where nothing ever happened until it did. A jogger named Rachel Doyle noticed the tape peeling loose in the wind and pulled the envelope free out of curiosity. She almost threw it away. Instead, she opened it. Inside was a single page, handwritten, the ink smeared from age and moisture. It was a confession, signed, dated, and it named a case that had been closed for 3 decades, the Bellwood disappearance. In 1994, 17-year-old Emily Carver vanished on her walk home from a friend's house, a walk she had made 100 times before. Her backpack was found the next morning near the old grain silo on Route 9, but Emily herself was never found. No body, no trace. The case went cold within 2 years, and Millhaven tried to forget the name it once said in whispers on every porch. Detective Marcus Wren had been a rookie back then, barely 24, assigned to knock on doors and take statements nobody wanted to give. He remembered Emily's mother standing in the doorway of their house, refusing to close it for weeks, certain her daughter would walk through it any day. He remembered the silence that followed when the leads dried up. He remembered filing the case away, unsolved, and the weight it left in his chest every year on the anniversary of her disappearance. Now retired, Wren still carried a photograph of Emily in his wallet. When the call came in about the letter, his hand shook before he even read it. The handwriting matched no one from the original suspect list, but it named a location, a name, and a detail about Emily's disappearance that had never, not once, been released to the public or the press, a detail only the police and the killer could have known. Wren drove to the old grain silo himself that night, alone, against every protocol he'd spent a career enforcing. The structure was half collapsed now, swallowed by weeds, the kind of place town kids dared each other to enter and never did. He pushed open the rusted side door, flashlight trembling in his grip. And there, carved into the wood just inside the frame, barely visible beneath 30 years of rot and rust, was something that had absolutely no business being there. A second name, one nobody had ever considered, one that changed everything they thought they knew about who took Emily Carver. The name carved into the wood was Daniel Pruitt. Wren said it aloud in the dark, and the silo seemed to swallow the sound whole. Pruitt had been 16 in 1994, Emily's classmate, a quiet boy who mowed lawns on weekends and rarely spoke above a murmur. He had been interviewed once, briefly, cleared within a day. His alibi had been airtight. His father, a respected pharmacist in town, had vouched for him without hesitation. But airtight alibis, Wren had learned over 30 years, were sometimes built by people who had every reason to lie. He drove home that night with the flashlight still trembling in the passenger seat, and by morning he had tracked down the current address of the man who used to be that quiet 16-year-old boy. Daniel Pruitt now lived 2 states away, in a modest house outside Pittsburgh, working as an insurance adjuster, married with 2 teenage daughters of his own. Wren wasn't a detective anymore. He had no badge, no warrant, no legal standing to knock on that door, but he went anyway. When Pruitt opened it, the color drained from his face before Wren said a single word. "I've been waiting 30 years for someone to find that," Pruitt said quietly and stepped aside to let him in. What followed wasn't a confession, not yet. It was something stranger. Pruitt claimed he hadn't hurt Emily. He said the real story was worse than anyone had considered, and that the confession letter hadn't been written by him at all, but by his own father, who had died 6 years earlier and left behind a locked storage unit that Pruitt had never had the courage to open. He handed Wren a key. The storage unit sat in a rundown facility on the outskirts of the city, one of dozens of identical metal doors lining a gravel lot. Inside, beneath a tarp coated in dust, Wren found boxes of old pharmacy records, a set of Polaroid photographs he wasn't prepared for, and a second, unfinished letter, this one dated only weeks before the elder Pruitt's death, apologizing to a family he had never met for a mistake he said he'd spent his whole life trying to bury. The letter implicated a fourth person entirely, someone who had worked alongside the elder Pruitt at the pharmacy, someone who had access to sedatives, to a delivery van, and to a set of back roads that ran straight past the grain silo on Route 9. Someone who, according to town records Wren pulled that same night, still lived less than 3 miles from where Emily Carver's backpack had been found. Wren called this in immediately, handing everything over to the Active Homicide Division, certain the case was finally about to close after 30 years of silence. But 2 nights later, before investigators could bring the fourth suspect in for questioning, his house burned to the ground, and inside the wreckage, alongside everything that might have proven the truth once and for all, they found a second set of remains, ones that had clearly been there for a very long time. The fire marshal ruled it arson within hours. Accelerant had been poured along the base of the house in a deliberate pattern, and whoever said it clearly wanted more than to destroy evidence. They wanted to make sure nothing inside would ever tell its story. The remains found in the basement had been there for years, wrapped in plastic sheeting beneath a false floor. Dental records confirmed what Wren had feared the moment he heard the news. It was Emily Carver. She had never been taken to the silo at all. The backpack had been planted there deliberately, decades earlier, to send investigators in the wrong direction while she lay less than 3 miles away the entire time. The fourth man, the one whose house had just burned down, was gone. No body matching his description was found in the wreckage, and by the following morning, his truck was discovered abandoned at a rest stop 200 miles north, keys still in the ignition, engine cold. Wren, now working unofficially alongside the active investigators who had once been his rookies, pieced together what the elder Pruitt's unfinished letter had been trying to say all along. In 1994, the pharmacy delivery driver had built a friendship with Emily through her mother's medication pickups, a relationship no one in town had ever thought twice about. When Emily discovered something he never intended for her to see, he panicked, and what followed was never planned, never premeditated in the way the town had always imagined a killer to be. It was worse. It was quiet, careless, and utterly human. The elder Pruitt had known for years. He had helped cover it, out of loyalty, out of fear, out of a debt he never explained in writing. His son, Daniel, had only discovered the truth after his father's death, and had spent 6 years too paralyzed by grief and shame to open that storage unit himself. 3 weeks after the fire, a hiker crossing the Canadian border reported a man matching the fourth suspect's description living alone in a remote cabin, using a name that wasn't his own. When authorities arrived, he didn't run. He simply sat at his kitchen table, hands folded, and waited. His confession, when it finally came, took less than 4 minutes to give and 30 years to arrive. Emily Carver was laid to rest that spring, in a ceremony her mother, now in her 70s, had waited 3 decades to hold. Detective Wren stood at the back of the crowd, the photograph he had carried in his wallet for 30 years finally able to rest somewhere other than his pocket. The case was closed. The man was charged. Justice, in whatever broken form it takes after 30 years, had finally arrived. But 2 months later, investigators reopened the old pharmacy's records one final time, cross-referencing delivery routes from that same year. They found 4 other names, 4 other families, in 4 other towns who had once filed missing persons reports that were never solved. And every single one of them lived along the exact same delivery route. If you think this story was intense, you're not ready for the next one. Hit subscribe so you don't miss it.